following video represents my opinion and should be interpreted as such. The information presented may be wrong or inaccurate, and everyone's encouraged to do their own research. Now, let's compare what we now know with Christine McDonald's interview with John Murat, because John Murat also had some things to say about what he saw that night. Quote, Mr. Murat went to the kitchen window, peel an orange, and saw a car with the flashers going. End quote. So right there we have a discrepancy between Atwood and Murat. You see, in Atwood's discussion with Christine McDonald, he claims he approached a dark car with no lights on. This is a discrepancy between Murat's claim, where the orange flashers caught his eye and were on prior to the bus's arrival. Moving on. Quote, the car backed up parallel to the road. End quote. So here we have, at least as it's written, it looks like John's describing an action, so we have to at least allow for the possibility that he's describing seeing the car back up into a parked position. I realize that can be interpreted differently, but it does look a certain way. Quote, within 4 to 5 minutes, a bus came down Route 112 from Woodsville, end quote. So the car's been here 4 to 5 minutes, right? Now there's another article where Atwood says when he approached the car, the airbags were out, all he could see was her mouth up. And if that's the case, it looks sort of weird against 4 to 5 minutes from the car being parked to the bus showing up. It's like, what? First of all, was there an accident or did it back up? And second of all, why would there still be airbags out 4 to 5 minutes later? Like, this person hasn't moved. Surely they would pat them down or sort of get them out of the way so that they could eventually get out of the car or whatever, smoke a cigarette perhaps. But that's the problem with Atwood's story for me as well, the airbag thing. Moving on, quote, stopped for 4 to 5 minutes, meaning, end quote, meaning that the bus stopped for 4 to 5 minutes. Again, we have a longer conversation, at least in John Murat's memory of the bus being there. A longer conversation happened, it would seem, than what Atwood said when he said, you know, a few words were exchanged, and he carried on. Quote, the bus continued down the road and backed into driveway located directly across the street from the Murat residence. He stayed in bus for quite a while and thought that was odd. He presumed that he was making the 911 call from the bus, end quote. Why would Murat think that Atwood's making the 911 call from in the bus? Well, probably because he had heard that a call came from that residence. He assumed that that was the call that prompted the police to come out. And since the police came out before, the police came to the scene before Atwood got out of the bus for the first time, because that's what Murat saw, Murat must have assumed that Atwood made that call from the bus, because again, he was probably looking and he didn't see Atwood go inside. Well, now that we know that police arrived at 7:35 and Atwood called at 7:42, of course Atwood will be on the bus until after police arrive. So Atwood, for seeming to be such a minor player, why is there so many problems or discrepancies with his version of events and the version of events that other people are experiencing or reporting? Like the hazard lights, were they on or did he tell her to turn them on? The airbags, why are they still inflated, like having just popped after the car's been sitting for several minutes? The location of the car. Is it at the sharp curve or is it where his wife put the car, and have they never talked about that? The time at the car, did he spend 4 or 5 minutes like John Murat remembers, or was it, you know, the very brief interaction that Atwood recalls? The timing of the 911 call, why is it so late? The content of the 911 call, why are the details wrong? It doesn't appear she hit a tree. The car did turn out to be drivable. We're going to come back to this list and add to it, quite frankly. But first, I want to go back to the scene, look at some other key details, and sort of start to theorize on what's going on here.
I interviewed Dick Guy in Woodsville many years ago. He was one of the EMTs on the ambulance that night, along with one other person, who I will not mention his name because he's never been brought into this. And in speaking with him, he said that from the minute they got there and they saw the way the car was and the towel in the exhaust pipe, that he said something was just not right with the scene. He also stated that it was weird that they were only there for 6 minutes, which I said from the beginning. Once EMTs arrived, they were only on scene for 6 minutes before they were sent away. And that's another thing that has been odd to me. And I know that there was no one at the scene to treat, but what if they found someone and they had sent them back? They would have had to come back, back again.
John recalls a couple observations by the paramedics, starting with the rag. And I won't get too into the rag, but I will say the explanation that the rag was in the tailpipe to prevent black smoke from coming out of the exhaust while the car was running strikes me as very unlikely, because that experiment has been run, and it's been run with Saturns, and it turns out as soon as the car starts, the rag is pushed out of the exhaust. What strikes me as more likely is something brought up on Twitter by someone with the handle Schmoosey, and this person suggested that in the US, sometimes a white rag is hung off of a car to signal to police that the owner of that car has gone for gas or gone for help locally, and therefore this situation's handled and the police can carry on with their evening. I'd never heard of that, but I did find many examples of people talking about that online. So the scenario might be Maura is trying to hang the rag off the tailpipe. She's got to get it out of the trunk. Flurry of activity at the trunk. She doesn't feel like she can get around to the front of the car without being seen by Cecil, who's incoming from the west. So she hangs it off the exhaust quickly and then heads east. The more interesting point John makes is about the EMTs leaving after 6 minutes. That's very brief an amount of time. Remember, Cecil goes from thinking there's someone injured.
Because there had been reports, he was looking for somebody injured.
To dismissing the EMTs and sending Butch out looking for Maura in a matter of minutes. But what is one thing we know happens in that short amount of time? We know that Cecil went and talked to Butch. In that conversation, it seems like Cecil decided EMTs could go home and Butch could go looking. So if Cecil knew Butch was going to look, wouldn't it be the most basic police operational duty to coordinate which direction Butch is going so that Cecil can go in the other? In other words, wouldn't Cecil know exactly which direction Butch searched? Let's have a look at this little snippet from the Oxygen documentary Transcript. This exchange is between John Monahan and Art Roderick, Officer John Monahan and, former U.S. Marshal Art Roderick. Art, right. Was there any reason why the search wasn't more to the east? John replies, no. That evening, you mean? Art, yeah, that evening. John, no. Art, it sounded like everyone came. John, yeah, we all came from the west to there. Art, the west. John, and I think because Sergeant Smith was saying, well, Butch is checking up over in there, and I said, I'll go check some of the back roads here, knowing that really that stretch of road back then, I think there was like 1, maybe 2 residences on it. The rest are kind of hunting cabs. It's pretty barren, and it just didn't make any sense that you would head in that direction, end quote. So John is saying that he didn't check there because Butch is checking up over in there, referring to and responding to Art's question about the east. He's also adding that it's pretty barren in that area, which describes the east perfectly. So he's talking about the east because that's the question he's asked. Quote, it made sense that you would go back to where you would come from, end quote. Again, she came from the west, so east was where Butch went and cops didn't go. Quote, Not probably perfect logic in 2020 hindsight, but at the time, it just seemed to me that you would head back to where there's more civilization rather than out into the woods of the Ammonoosuc area out there, end quote. So they didn't search east because they thought Butch went east. And what's the most reasonable explanation for thinking Butch went east? Either because Cecil told Butch to go east, or Cecil watched Butch go east. But remember, the EMTs are gone. There's no cell service. Butch can't communicate with officers over the radio. He appears unfit to offer medical assistance or chase the person down. He has no authority to arrest. Most importantly, she already supposedly told him she doesn't want to ride with him. So how would he apprehend her if he did see her? See what I'm saying? What does Butch bring to the table? Nothing that I can think of. Yet he's part of the party. He's part of the party searching east, and his story matches the story police come out with 6 days post-event. Can you see how it's starting to look like police knew Butch was taking Maura out of there in his Bronco?
Person is left in the personal vehicle.
I said I'd revisit this list of problems with Butch Atwood's story. Now seems like the appropriate time. So in addition to the issues we've talked about, there's this issue of whether Maura was drinking or not drinking. Both statements have been attributed to Butch at some point. Butch claiming the media misquoted him and he didn't tell police that she appeared to have been drinking. Well, years later and after Butch passed, Cecil, again in the Oxygen documentary Transcript, relays that Butch was in fact the witness who said Maura appeared to have been drinking. Of less importance, but worth noting, Butch failed a polygraph. In addition, he moved out of state shortly after this incident occurred near his house. And most importantly to me, the scent dogs lost track of Maura's scent seemingly at the end of Atwood's driveway. This image, again, from the Oxygen documentary. So, where am I going with all this? Why doesn't Butch Atwood's story need to make any sense? Why would the cops have not noticed and called him on these things? Well, let me tell you what I think, and you can decide if it resonates with you. I think Barb Atwood called 911 around 7:05 when the car was
right across the street from our house.
Barb's house is in Grafton County, but it's in Bath County School District on 112, aka Swiftwater Road. Confusing, right? Barb tried to get her 911 transcript from authorities, but her request was denied. I think an officer arrived only to discover that the car was not in his jurisdiction. I think the officer made a judgment call that the driver was okay, so he let her go about her business, only asking that she move away from the intersection at Bradley Hill Road, perhaps out of safety or to avoid him getting called back to this location. Around 7:10, he relayed over the radio that the person had left in a personal vehicle.
Person is left in the personal vehicle.
After Maura moved the car away from the intersection at Bradley Hill Road, her car was backwards outside the Westman house, resulting in a 911 call at 7:27, with the location of the car firmly in Haverhill PD jurisdiction at this point. Atwood arrives and talks with Maura. She claims to have a tow truck coming. Atwood's skeptical and perhaps calls her bluff, opening the door up for a longer conversation. The two notice incoming police lights, and Maura's frantic. He tells her to lock up the car and meet him at his house, but first hang a rag off the car so the officer might keep moving. Atwood closes the door and speeds home. Maura grabs a white rag from the trunk of her car and then decides she doesn't have time to get to the front of the car, so she stuffs it in the tailpipe before running towards Atwood's house. And the Westmans are distracted by the incoming police lights from the west and fail to see Maura run east down the middle of the road. She intercepts the bus, which is backing up, and gets on. Once parked, Maura and Butch watch the police lights come to a stop at the Saturn. Shortly after, Witness A drives by and parks briefly at the top of Atwood's driveway.
I stopped, in front of Butch Atwood's house, and I had an instinctual feeling that I should help.
After Witness A continues home, Atwood gets out of the bus and calls 911, reporting that the car hit a tree near to where it is currently parked, thereby erasing the first location from the story. By calling at 7:42 and not reporting the police on scene, he's altering the timeline to suggest police have not arrived. But Atwood has already learned from Maura about the agreement she made with an officer to move the car west. That's when Atwood begins acting with near impunity. He'll call in and alter facts, even drive her out of there, because he believes it's in line with what she and the police want. This is why Atwood's story doesn't make sense. It doesn't have to. It just needs to match the story police are putting out, because the police aren't going to budge. And you might be thinking maybe police don't even know. Did anyone ask Cecil his thoughts on Butch going to search in hindsight? Well, yeah, Maggie did. She says, "What did you make of that?" Cecil says, quote, "A small town like that? Not much, to tell you the truth. I mean, sorry," end quote. And then Art hits Jeff's foot, apparently, and then tells us about it, and there's laughs in the room, as if this is some inside joke that us mere civilians would never understand, that's so funny about Butch going to search for Maura in this instance. You can see why, for me, that just raises more questions. It's almost like Art just has to express to Jeff that he knows here, right? And then he has to tell us, "I tapped Jeff's foot there." So let's back that all the way up. The police would have talked to Barb after this evening. They would know that the car was across from Barb's, and they would know that the car was in a different location than Butch put it. They would also know that the car probably didn't hit a tree in the location that Barb saw it, because there was no trees around.
The grass in front of his trailer is where she landed.
Then they would know that the second location was probably where the car was parked after coming to rest in Forcier's yard. To top it off, police would know almost immediately in the following days that Atwood's 911 call came in late, and they already had an officer on scene because the state told Art Roderick
He actually got there a lot earlier.
they had an officer on scene way before 7:46, so they would have known it was probably 7:35 because that's when witness A drove by, and they would have been able to correct Atwood's mistake here. They don't, probably because something about Atwood's 911 call worked for them. So there you have it. Take some time with this. Understand it. Watch it again if you need to. I think you'll conclude, as I have, that police and Butch know a lot more about how Maura disappeared from the weathered barn corner that night than either have let on. And I don't think police or Butch harmed Maura that night. I think Butch drove Maura out of there. It was a don't ask, don't tell situation. Everyone thought they were doing her a favor, keeping her out of trouble, but obviously something went wrong after she was dropped off. And knowing that last known location, the actual last known location, might seem trivial, but it changes everything. It gives the family a new place to look. And that's what the public and the family need to push for. That's how we can help Maura. Thanks for watching.
One more point is that on 2/10 of 04, we received a Grafton County Sheriff's Department report, and on that report it stated about the accident and everything. And at a later date, we received another Grafton County Sheriff's Department report, which was received to us on 11/4 of 2004. And it's obvious that these Grafton County Sheriff's Department reports had been either redacted or somehow changed, because there are missing parts from the one that we received in the beginning and the one we received how many months later. So my question is, and it's the exact time that we believe that the accident happened, because in the beginning it was said at approximately 7:05 a car slid off the road on Swiftwater Road. Okay? That was the original article that ever came out in the papers. And that got changed to 7:30 when Faith Westminute called at 7:27. And because of these Grafton County Sheriff's Department reports, there is something amiss about what actually occurred. Like 2 hours missing. That's on one, but not on another.
Which is what was missing from the one that you have, from Grafton County.
Yeah, and they're different.
2 hours is missing?
2 hours is missing from the report.
Which 2 hours?
The 2 hours basically before, from time 7:27, that call goes back to 6:10 at night. And almost that. No, it's like an hour and 45 minutes, I think, is missing. And it covers that 7:05 time of what I believe was the actual first call where the car slid off the road and then left the scene.
No kidding, okay.
Why do you think that's missing?
Yep. I have no idea. I don't think it's a glitch in the computer. I don't think it was a glitch in the printer. I'm not blaming anyone. I am not blaming anyone by any means, but there's something amiss. And I would want it explained. That's one thing I would have wanted explained.